Hi everyone, this is Byron Jacobs from D&B Poker, and today in the series of interviews that I like to do with our authors, I'm talking to Gareth James. Hi Gareth.
Hey Byron, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm getting used to being a new dad. So
That's
I've got a
great news
two
to
and a
hear.
half week old boy, and he's amazing. But getting used to that whilst trying to still keep a coaching business going is it's an interesting balancing act at the moment.
Well, that's great news to hear that that's all going well. And today, Gareth is here specifically to talk about. Sorry, I've just got to change the background because if I hold this book up, I know it will disappear with that background. So this is the book that Gareth has recently written, The Final Table. Quite a nice chunky book. It's 330 pages. Dozens of examples, well, more than dozens, probably hundreds of examples how to play all different final table situations. We're really happy with this book, and we're going to chat to Gareth about this book now. So I'll just put my background back on again. Now, first of all, Gareth, I know there's a little strange coincidence with this book, and I was wondering if you would just like to tell the viewers about the odd little coincidence we had with this book.
Well, I presume you're referring to the fact that I really wanted to write a book about the final
Exactly.
table, and I had a chat with my wife, and I said, "Do you know what? Tomorrow I'm going to send an email. I'm going to send an email to Byron and see what he thinks." No idea what he's going to say, but let's go for it. So next day I go to write the email, but there was already an email in there for you saying, "Oh, I've got an idea for a new book. Can we arrange a Zoom call?" I thought, wow, that's crazy. So we had the Zoom call, and then you said, "Oh, I really want you to write a book about the final table." And I thought, well, that's exactly what I wanted to do as well. And yet we hadn't had that conversation. I'd literally only had it with my wife, who knows nothing about poker really. So yeah, that was a very strange coincidence and happy coincidence.
Yeah, very, very fortunate. Obviously, I don't know, something in the air or whatever must have
Yeah.
like stimulated it. Anyway, the book's obviously been written, and it's out now, and it's available through all the usual channels. What might be great to start off is if you could explain. I mean, obviously the subject matter is fairly obvious from the title, The Final Table. What was your aim with this book? What were you trying to help people with precisely?
So I guess really the goal is twofold. The first one is to give you so many examples about final tables that you understand the changes in strategies that occur at the different parts of the final table, from when you're playing sort of 8 to 10 handed through to short-handed and 3-handed and heads up. So things change as you progress through the tournament. I wanted to be able to compare those to maybe potentially earlier in the tournament as well. And through those examples, just give you lots of different situations that you might find yourself in at a final table, and probably are not approaching in the right way unless you've done any serious study on this. So even things like how your big blind defense range changes based on who opens, how many, how big your stack is compared to the opener, where you sit in the sort of the current pecking order, like how big your risk premium is against the opener. So that's the first one. So I wanted to sort of teach the theory, sort of like the idea of bubble factors and risk premiums and how that affects strategy, and then go through lots of different examples all the way through to heads up where there's no risk premium and ICM. And then the second part was, how do you actually continue to get better? Because there's, I've given a lot, as you mentioned earlier, like there's over 100 hand examples in the book. But even that's probably not enough. In order to get better every single day, I wanted to be able to give the reader, a sort of an approach that works for me and works for the students that I coach to get better every day. So to be able to run your own sims, to be able to analyze whole cards up footage, be able to identify areas for improvement in your own game, and lots of different ideas for getting better every single day.
Okay, that's good. So, of course, obviously, not everyone may know, but you co-wrote a book with Trisha Cardner, and a lot of that was about very specific techniques for actually getting better at, well, poker in this instance, but based on the kind of theories of developing excellence that are sort of out there at the moment, and are based on like modern approaches to learning. So, I guess that's also wrapped up in the whole what you're trying to do with the book.
Yeah, exactly. I think I was chatting to someone about this the other day, about how the education system, certainly in the UK, and I think it's the same in the US, so I imagine it's the same sort of everywhere in the world, is so we're set up to learn facts and then regurgitate facts. But logical and critical thinking is not something that is perhaps taught, encouraged, supported in certainly in education in the UK. So there's a chapter in this book about logical thought process and about being able to understand like how to interpret solver and actually come up with some useful heuristics or takeaways or light bulb moments. Because it's all good that you can run the sim, and like one of the biggest mistakes I see from potentially newer players, but I see some good players do this as well, is they'll run a sim and they'll say, oh yeah, pocket tens, yeah, that was fine, yeah, it was fine to call there, whatever. But they're not actually learning anything. And these sims take quite a long time to run. It took me months to run all the sims in the book. And I just think it's what a waste to spend time running the sim, waiting for the sim to finish just to line check whether or not something's working. So by encouraging this logical thought process and saying to yourself, right, what I'm actually learning from this, why is tens a call? What other hands are calling? What hands are three betting? What hands are jamming? You can force yourself to actually learn more from the sim, and it's that thought process and an idea around making good decisions based on the theory, and then you can make adjustments based on who you're playing against. That sort of sets it apart from like the traditional way to sort of memorize. A lot of people have said, "Well, I've got your book and I'm trying to memorize all the ranges," and I thought, "Wow, no, don't." Keep reading. There's a bit about like don't memorize. Try work out, like have a look at the solution, and then try to work out what's going on. And that for me is my favorite part of my job. In being able to see what the solution looks like from a sort of equilibrium standpoint, and then being able to break it down for people to understand and say, okay, this is the reason why this is happening.
Okay, that leads me on to the next thing I had in mind, because I know from like my own very minor investigations and also from working on your book and this material in general, that there are situations in the late stages of final table play where the correct play is completely counterintuitive. Like sometimes you have to become unbelievably loose and sometimes you have to be unbelievably tight, just based on quite subtle factors. And I can imagine somebody who perhaps like me has a little an inkling about this but doesn't really, would be quite intimidated, thinking like, I'm never going to learn this because it's all to do with specific situations and very subtle things. So can you develop, if you look at enough of this stuff, can you develop like a good feel as to when you need to be completely out of whack as to what you might expect your correct ranges and responses to be?
Yeah, I think so. So it definitely is. This is why I encourage it in the book to actually, be running your own sims and analyzing them and getting better every day, because it's the sort of the reps, the repetitions. Like you get in the gym. The more you do of this, the more you start to see the patterns. And I mean, as broad heuristics. If you're a big stack, you probably get to play really aggressively. As a medium stack against a big stack, you've got to play quite tight, quite passively in a lot of situations. So it's about comparing your stack size to somebody else's, and how if you're second versus first in chips, for example, whatever the stage of the tournament, like the stage of the final table, you're probably going to have to play a lot differently from if you're ninth in chips against the person who's eighth in chips. So you see a lot wider ranges, sort of like ninth versus eighth, than you do with second versus first, and even like ninth versus first. Like you have the biggest risk premium against the chip leader always. So your ranges against them are going to be very different from against somebody else who might have a short stack like you, and you get to call off wider.
If you've obviously, when you're playing a normal game of poker and you're not in a final table situation, players get used to the idea of adjusting to tendencies that their opponents have. Like a very obvious example, if the cutoff is opening too much, then on the button you need to be three betting like much more than you normally would to exploit the cutoff's far too wide range. This presumably also happens at the final table. If you maybe somebody who's there who's maybe perhaps more of a social player than a professional or very sophisticated player, and they may be, you can see from their play that they maybe don't understand what they should be doing. Presumably there are adjustments you can make that can really exploit players in that, who have that kind of approach to final table play.
Yeah, I mean, it goes kind of both ways. Like sometimes they'll play way too loose. They don't understand that they need to be folding more in the big blind. Let's say they're second in chips against the chip leader who's opened under the gun. and they should be folding a lot more, but they're just, playing the hands that they normally play from the big blind. But similarly, they might be someone who plays way too tight. This is, they satellited into this tournament, and it's a much bigger game. So, against somebody who's obviously, they always say, like, when I first started learning poker, they always said, like, if somebody's playing really tight, you play really loose, and if someone is playing loose, you've got to play tighter. And there is a section in the book where I discuss, the ideas about if somebody's not doing what they should do, you have to adjust. And because otherwise, the only people to benefit are the other people involved in the hand. So if you're involved in the hand and the player who isn't very good or isn't sort of playing ball are involved in the hand, the only people to really benefit are the people not involved in the hand, because they're gaining EV from mistakes. So yeah, you've got to be really careful. You can't just continue to shove. There's one hand in particular. I can't remember the exact setup, but there's a hand where the chip leader is supposed to jam a lot of big blinds because he knows that the player in second can't call. And there was actually a hand recently. I say recent. I don't know how long ago. I feel like it was potentially last December. So that's how quickly this year's going. But where the chip leader jammed for quite a lot of big blinds, and then the guy in second woke up with kings, I think, and kings called, and then the guy with kings ended up winning the whole tournament. But like the jam was fine. Like, you can jam in that situation. You should be jamming really, really wide because the player in second can't call. I mean, in that example, it was just unlucky to run into a hand that could actually call. But if you've got a player in there going, oh, well, I've got, ace jack, that's fine for 40 big blind open jam, I'll call, because they don't really know what they're doing. That's hurting your EV, and it's obviously going to hurt theirs. And everyone else is loving it because that EV shift is going to go from you to them if they win, and if not, it goes to you, and they have a pay jump or whatever. So yeah, I think this is where I often get some pushback. It's like, why are we listening to a solver? Like, nobody plays like a solver. I always recommend you start with the solver solution. That's why I said in the book, like, I could talk about exploits, and there is a section on exploits. But the thing is that exploits are going to change over time, whereas solver solutions are very rarely going to change. They're going to be evergreen, I think. So that's why I went with those. And then I said, this is why you've got to work backwards and try to work out what's going on. Because if you can do that, then you can say, well, actually, this player isn't playing like that. Therefore, I've got to do something different.
One thing that I think feel quite strongly about this book is that when pit players, they're not every day they're going to find themselves at a final table. It's only going to occur now and again. So the players might be thinking to themselves, well, I don't need this book because, it's only like one time in 6 months I'm going to make a final table or something. But I would say the counter argument is that when you actually are at the final table, the amount of EV it costs you, and financially in dollars it costs you by making a mistake, is way out of kilter with all the like little tiny mistakes you might make earlier on in events where you just doubled up your buy-in or something like that. Would you say that that's correct? I mean, like if someone plays like a $50 buy-in and they maybe get to the final table and there might be 10k first prize, 6k second or something, I would have thought you could make a mistake there that could cost you like $1,000, whereas you'd have to make dozens of mistakes to lose that much EV in other events. Is that a reasonable?
I think that's fair. Yeah. I think that's really fair. I think some of the posts I've seen on Twitter when I've been promoting the book has been like, oh, but have you got a book about getting to the final table? Because I'm not getting there often enough. And so yeah, we might have to have a chat, Byron, at some point to write the getting to the final table book for the next one. But I always call it the business end of the tournament. It's where the most money is won and lost, and mistakes on a final table are so expensive. And yeah, you really want to know what you're doing. So and the thing is, that I think is good about the book is it teaches you about risk premium and bubble factor, so you can apply these concepts to earlier on in the tournament. It's not just a case of like, oh, if you're making final tables regularly but you're not seeing the results by this book. It's kind of like, there's lots of learning to be taken from the book that you can apply earlier in the tournament. And as we learn more about solvers, and solvers are getting better at running sims for earlier on in the tournament. There's a lot of debate about how useful they are, but there is risk premium and there are bubble factors earlier on in the tournament, before the bubble or after the bubble or between the bubble and the final table. So if you understand these concepts of risk premium, you can get better at estimating what your risk premium is against a particular opponent at any stage of the tournament and adjust your strategy like that. So whilst it's called the final table, all the examples are from the final table. There are some examples of bubbles where you might play a small field tournament and say, there are 9 players left and 7 are paid, so you actually do have a bubble. So you're getting some bubble practice in there as well. But yeah, there's a lot of the concepts that I teach will be transferable to other stages.
Okay, one thing I'm curious about and wondering is, obviously you did a lot. I mean, you said earlier you did a lot of research and you ran a lot of sims, which took months to like generate the information you needed, the data to construct the examples that you give. Were there things that, I mean, you're obviously quite familiar with this stuff because you must have worked with a lot anyway. Were there things that cropped up while you were doing this and you thought, my God, you have to play that range there, really? I mean, was there stuff that really surprised you as you were doing it?
Yeah, so I'll give you a little sort of insight as to how I found the hands. Some of them are from my own database where I wasn't 100% sure that I played it well, and when I ran it, that was confirmed. But I did a lot of research and looking at whole cards up footage on YouTube, and I decided to look at the highest buy-in tournaments because I expected players there to be playing somewhat close to optimally or somewhat close to how the solver would play, and those two things potentially can be different. And what I realized, I was analyzing, thinking, okay, I'm not sure about this spot. Let's run it and use it as an example. This player is very good. I'm sure what they've done here is good, so let's compare it. And then I looked at the solution, and it was just completely different. And I thought, okay, so everybody's got a long way to go. Like, I've been asked, I've done a few of these interviews and said, okay, who's the book for? And it's, lower mid stakes players who want to get better at playing final tables, want to turn those deep runs into top 3 finishes. But honestly, looking at the examples I got from the book, and I was very keen to keep it anonymous because I don't want to call anybody out. And everyone's got reasons for playing hands the way they did. And there's so much to learn. Like, none of us can say that we're going to play every final table perfectly because there's so many things that change. But there are some key things within this, in the examples, where players are doing something that's way off. It's not like a pip or 2 out. Like, it's like, whoa, this is really bad. Like, this should never be a call. This should never be a jam. So that really surprised me. So it was more about like learning that players who I think are very, very good have some big leaks on final tables. But then there were some examples of where you don't see it very often, but big jams, like 40, 50 big blind open jams, like I mentioned earlier on. That's what the solver says, but like, would we ever see it in practice? And I gave some examples in the book that said, this is what it looks like at equilibrium. But in practice, I don't think someone's shoving 40 big blinds. So let's change it and take away the option to jam and see how that affects the strategy. So you see it from both sides. So yeah, there was definitely some eye-opening stuff. And I think the post-flop ICM stuff as well is really interesting, because I've not really seen too much of that around. I've not seen any really in any sort of any literature. I've seen some videos, but not a huge amount. I think a lot of the sims and study that people do is still sort of chip EV. So when you get to final table, the strategy is going to change. Like as a big stack defending against a short stack, you're going to see more donk bets. You're going to be your opponent's not going to see bet as frequently. Maybe they do in practice, but in theory they shouldn't. So there's lots of things that once you start diving into final table, you start doing your own research and running your own sims, you're going to discover these little patterns that you can start implementing into your game.
One other thing I've noticed it's very much my impression the last 2 or 3 years, these bounty tournaments have become a lot more popular. There seem to be more bounty formats and stuff like that. Do you get situations at the final table where having bounties dramatically affects what you should do, or is that quite a minor thing in the grand scheme?
No. So it's definitely something you need to be thinking about. My friend describes it as like bounties are like the kryptonite to the to ICM. Like, one thing's you're going to drag one way for ICM for the final table and one the other way for the bounties. It really depends how big the bounty is. I think sometimes a lot of newer players can get caught up in, okay, this is a really big bounty and it's much more than the next pay jump, so therefore I'm going to gamble to win this bounty. I never really liked this idea of gamble. It's like when trying to explain, I play tournaments and you pay your entry fee, and then for me it's not really gambling, but I understand that it is. And you could never convince someone who doesn't play poker that it's not gambling. There's obviously a huge element of gambling, But when it comes to bounties, you think, okay, yeah, I need to be a bit more. I need to be looser here. I need to gamble a bit more to try and win a bounty. Oh, this bounty here, it's $400, and the next pay jump's only 120. Like, let's gamble. I don't like that idea, because it then takes away this sort of concept of, is it plus EV or is it minus EV, right? You could win a $400 bounty, but the decision you made was minus EV in the long run. So yeah, I always think that you've got to bring it back to making the most profitable decisions every time. But yeah, the bounties, yeah, I mean, again, I've given an example in the book of the change in strategies in a PKO compared to what I would call a vanilla tournament. So, but again, like, I could have probably done a whole book on PKO final table strategy, as to give so many more examples. I really just wanted to make this book like loads of examples, obviously lots of vanilla examples, but then take what you're learning and start applying it to your own study and your own sims, and start to to draw out the information. When I was at school, you used to be able to get the answers for all your maths questions in the back of the textbook. So if you wanted to, you could just go to the back and just write them in. And then but you weren't going to get any marks, right? You just, you might get the marks for the right answer, but then where's your working out, right? So essentially, I kind of see it the same in poker. You got to try and work out what's going on in order for the next time that you have a similar situation, you can actually work out what's going on and make the right decision. I don't want to just give you all the answers. I'm giving you a lot of answers, but I'm giving you a lot of explanation as well for each of these hand examples in the book. I think that, the last thing, I remember when I first started coaching, somebody said, what would you do here? And I said, it doesn't really matter what I would do here. It's about how you would approach it and how we can make you getting better at making the decision. I can give you an answer. And I know some people just like, no, just tell me what you would do. And I said, okay, I would call. That's not very helpful for you. How are you going to use that information in the future? So yeah, that's the sort of the general idea with the book, is to sort of motivate you to, here's all the research that I did. Now, if you put a little bit of work in, every single day, you could, you can pull out really big takeaways and start implementing those.
I think that also resonates with what we were talking about a little bit earlier about the learning process. I think when people are like forced to like do the work themselves, they're much more likely to remember it than if they've had the answer presented to them on a plate, which is perhaps helpful. One other little thing occurred to me while you were talking. Like you said, there's some big names at final tables with big buy-ins that have made plays that are, in retrospect, like completely wrong according to ICM theory, etc., etc. And I'm wondering if you were to like quiz that player, they might come back and say, well, actually, I knew I was playing far too tight here, but I didn't want to risk busting out because I think I've got future EV in because these players are so bad, and I want to stick around to exploit that. Is that a valid way to approach, or should you always be looking for the plus EV spot in the here and now, and not maybe worrying too much about the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of the top players that I've spoken to in writing the book, as I was coming up with it, all talk about future EV. It's such a difficult thing to measure. And I'll sometimes I when I hear that, I feel like they're just justifying their decision for making a minus EV, taking a minus EV line. But I'm always really keen to stay open-minded. When I see somebody somebody's ranked top, on pocket fives, in the world, a lot over the last 10 years, make a jam in a spot where it's really poor, and they're losing EV, and actually, they should just fold. I try to work out what's going on, but they could be just like, if we had a chat with them, they could say, oh, I didn't actually know. I didn't know that. Or I felt like in my experience, rather than a solution, in my experience, I think they overfold here, so therefore I'm going to jam more. There's always you can always give justifications. I've seen a lot of video content when I don't agree with the line that they've taken, but they justify it. And I think everyone goes, oh, yeah, all right, fair enough. But actually, I'm not sure. You can always justify a line. You can say, oh, well, I jammed 7 deuce off here because I thought he was only going to call with aces. And then he calls with Jack 10 suited, and whatever. I think it's a dangerous game. But I like to always say, have a look at the solution. What does the solution say? Understand why you're doing what, why is the solution suggesting that? And then you can adjust from there. I have also heard from other from top players. There are some players in these big final tables that care more about the wins than about the money. So it's more important to them to win a tournament, or to win a scoop, to win a W Coop, to win a whatever. So they tend to play it more like winner takes all, or chip EV, which is, you know, it's interesting actually, because there is a section in the book where they made a deal, I think 3-handed, and then the rest of the tournament plays out chip EV, and that's going to play very differently from ICM. So yeah, lots of interesting things come from watching these top players play with whole cards up. But I think remain open-minded. But I also feel like don't put these players on a pedestal. Like, they're obviously very, very good, and they'll have reasons for doing what they're doing. So be open-minded in the sense that, like, try and work it out. But also, they might have just made a mistake. Like, and you know, we're only human, and if they've not studied that particular sport, and you know, there are lots of different situations on a final table, they might not have studied it, or they, you know, might be 1 or 2 pips out, and they're, you know, they're losing a little bit of money, but for them, it's not, you know, not a big deal.
Okay, so just to wrap up, I'm just gonna just quickly change my background again. Just 1 second, so I can hold this book up. So yeah, here we have it. This is Gareth's book, The Final Table. You can get it from us, from our website, and we'd quite like it if you did that. But if you prefer to go through the other self-evident sales channels, then that's great too. But there's a ton of information in this book, and I'd like to say thank you very much, Gareth, for giving us a bit of time to talk through some of the ideas in the book. And I think that's been very helpful for everybody.
Well, thanks, Byron. I appreciate the opportunity to chat to you, and yeah, I think it's been great.
Okay, thanks very much, Gareth.
Cheers.
Bye.